welcome everybody. Hi Ingo, hi Doug. How are you doing?
All right. Very cold here, but all good. Where are you? I'm in Cologne.
I'm currently in Copenhagen, doing a little Nordic trip together with my partner, and yeah, in a nice hotel, going to the city tonight. Maybe that's the ideal question right now because we oftentimes have such an international audience. If you would quickly type into the chat where you're joining in from today. Ingo's in Cologne. Doug, you're in the UK right now.
I am currently, yeah. I was last time I was on the webinar, I was in Delhi in India, but today I'm in London, UK.
Great, nice to have you.
Most southern of the three of us.
Yeah, that's something to say. Ingo, would you like to share the slides with us so we can start with the introduction and then...
Okay, can you see it?
Yes, we can see your screen. So welcome everybody to our first webinar of 2025 with the topic tackling rising cost strategies to protect your margins in 2025. A topic much requested at the end of last year with surging commodity prices impacting consumer goods and other industries. And yeah, we're looking forward. We already see Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, Mexico, Stockholm, Paris, Prague, Yorkshire, Madrid. So an international crowd again. Welcome, everybody. We have something nice prepared for you. If you go to the next slide, Ingo, then I'll introduce you to our two expert speakers today. As always, with us is Buynomics co-founder and managing director Ingo Reinhardt. You know him. He has more than 15 years experience in pricing and revenue growth management, and he developed the Buynomics method back in 2018. And then I think it's your second webinar you're hosting, Doug, is Doug Hampshire, our head of customer value with 8 years experience in management consultancy and working globally from Africa and India, but currently in the UK. And now to Buynomics. Quick, what is Buynomics doing? At Buynomics, we help companies make smarter and faster decisions in revenue growth management. Our virtual shopper AI technology simulates real-world shopper behavior with up to 95% predictive accuracy of market behavior. This way, we enable holistic optimization of pricing, promo, price pack architecture, portfolio mix, and costs while accounting for competitive dynamics and retailer pressures. Our customers, including Danone, General Mills, Nestle, Unilever, L'Oreal, and more, see up to 4% higher gross profits and save up to 90% of their time spent on analysis. And if you're interested in tackling your RGM challenges together with us, you can just book a demo on our website or contact us directly, and then we speak one-to-one. But right now, the stage is yours, Ingo. Let's talk about rising commodity prices.
Yeah, thanks, Jonathan, for the intro, and thanks, Doug, for supporting in this webinar in a few minutes. And thanks all of you for joining today. Things are probably already too late in January, but I'll say it anyway. So happy New Year. All of us have a successful 2025, and certainly looking forward to an interesting year. I think we're kicking off the year with our webinars with an interesting topic, costs. As we will see, I think it's both easy and difficult when you go from like the basic principles to the real world applications, which I'll hand over to Doug. So I think that it has a broad range. We've also prepared, I think Jonathan will put links into the chat, a cheat sheet, which covers, I would say, the basic topics that we'll be covering today as a summary. So if you're interested in that, please download it. And now let's get started. And I think we'll go from simple to increasingly complex in this session. So why do costs matter in pricing? I think it's, if you look at it from a very basic point of view, in the way we look at it in university, in microeconomics, it's very straightforward, right? There's a basic relationship between costs, price, the demand and simplify it as its demand function. And in this example, and we'll come back to this example in a few minutes, if you just look at the basics here. So let's consider this example. So we're selling a product which costs us maybe a cell phone, something like that, that costs us 100 euros to make. And we see when we change price 1%, we lose 2% in demand. That results in a price elasticity of -2. And let's say we are in a world where price elasticity is constant. So that means we have an exponential demand curve. Then in this case, the relationship between price and cost is very straightforward. And it's can be expressed in a simplified way in the equation that we have here. So in this case, margin times price elasticity is -1 in the profit optimal. So in this case, it means if it costs us 100 euros to make, we have a price elasticity of -2. The profit optimal margin is 50%. That means that the profit optimal price in this case is 200 euro, which means at cost of 100, we have a margin of 50%. So here in this simplified schoolbook world, the relationship between costs and pricing is very straightforward. And we'll come in a minute to what it means if now costs change. How do I need to, or how should I then also adjust my prices? So this to get started, and I think to warm everyone up, we have our first survey question here. Jonathan, if you want to take over from here, because I don't know where I need to, what buttons I need to press.
Yes, no worries. First question on RGM challenges. We want to ask you, what is the biggest challenge your team or you are facing in managing the rising costs? Let me pull up the poll and launch it. Ingo, can you see it?
I can see it, yeah.
Great. So we have different options. It's single choice only. So probably most of you come in for volatile commodity prices. We also have inflation impacts, trade terms with retailers, consumer behavior or shopper behavior changes, or others. Please specify in the comments. And if you do not want to answer, please click on NA so we know that the participation goes up. Currently 50% already participating. Let's wait another 10 seconds and then I share with you the results so we get a glimpse of the atmosphere right now and the biggest challenges. 5 more seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and I'm ending the poll and sharing the results with you. So, surprise, volatile commodity prices on the one, but also the other aspects gained some answers. What are you thinking about this, Ingo?
I think so. Initially, it looked like everyone was going for the volatile commodity prices. So, and I was already like adjusting my story to that answer. But I think we got a very like diverse set, and we have in the lead what I expect. So it's the volatile commodity prices that will come to inflation, consumer behavior changes. These are all things I think that are to some extent related, and that we want to attack in the coming slide. So I think we're on the right track here, and if there's anything that you find missing while we go through the content, please let us know. Always interested in improving, and if you think we could benefit from like adding a certain aspect, we're very happy to do so. Did everyone see the replies? And I think I'll just close this, right?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. All right, so those are the basics, and before we come back to some theory on the topic, let's take a look at I think the world we're living in, and which was also reflected in I think the answers that you provided. If we look back just at the past 5 years here, we see that we and we're just looking for simplicity here at the US and Europe. We came essentially from a world prior to 2021, 2020, from a world with very low inflation, and we've seen that. So I would say to some extent pricing was a bit easier in the world with much fewer changes going on, and then essentially starting in 21, 22 until maybe last year, we saw a very steep increase of inflation going up to 6-8% per year, and then since then essentially coming back not fully to the levels we've seen before 21, but to a much lower level. So what we're seeing is that we have steep increase in pricing, and of course we to some extent some or other extent we were all involved in this when we're pricing professionals. We've very much seen both the cost increase, and we've also been part to some extent of the price increases that have been pushed through to the market to make sure that we're still properly priced in our field. So I think this is the world, of course, and I see many politicians getting this wrong. If inflation rates go down, that doesn't necessarily mean that prices go down, right? It's just that the speed of price increases is decreasing. And for us, but that makes a difference for us if we have, for example, in a world with high inflation. I've seen many companies who've increased prices more frequently. They, for example, went from price increases once a year to quarterly or 2 price increases per year. So these are meaningful changes for what we've done, and that has been reverted to some extent. And this, as we will also see, and it's hard to say that everyone has been affected in the same way, but there's a broad range in which different categories have been affected. And in some making it necessarily after prices have been increased, maybe in some extent, in instances too much, to make some corrections. In some cases, this could mean price decreases. In others, it could mean increase in the frequency of promotions or changes in the pack price architecture. So all kinds of challenges, and very simplified and summarized. I think that in the time 21 to 23, I think the focus was in many organizations what we've seen really on price increases, and after that, to some extent, a shift also to other levers within the field. Increasing or decreasing the frequencies of promotions, working on price pack architecture now that prices have been shifted, and many see that the way the portfolio is set up doesn't really fit that reality anymore, causing sort of another set of challenges from the one we had a few years ago. So I think that's very broadly the world we're living in, and because we're today talking about cost increases and or cost changes and how to deal with it, let's take 2 more extreme cases of commodity costs that have an impact on pricing. And of course, these are just 2 examples, and there are many more than that. So, and I think 2 of them are that we came across that had been increased significantly is cocoa and olive oil, who both went from somewhere around $2,000 per ton up to 8 or 10,000. And what we're seeing in both is that after 24, where they sort of peaked, they're now going down, or in any case, the volatility has increased. And I think that's the key challenge where many of us are facing, is that costs have increased significantly, and also affecting, if we look at cocoa, if we look at chocolate bars with different shares of cocoa in a chocolate bar, that affects different products, of course, differently. And the complexity then comes from the fact how to deal with that, knowing that different products are being affected differently by these cost increases. So this is the world we're living in, from, simplified again, a more stable world in terms of the prices of commodities that are being used to produce our products, to a world with higher prices and also an increase in volatility. So what to do with that? And again, we start with a simplest way, come back to the sort of demand graph that we have. And I think because it's important, we add one level of complexity already. Before, we were only looking at this exponential demand function, which is you always explicitly or implicitly assume when you're working with a constant price elasticity. So you're always then assuming this type of demand function. I think the other key one that's been used a lot in the field is this linear demand function. And what's already interesting here is that the choice of demand function has already a very meaningful impact on how to react to price changes. So what does it mean? Let's start, because it's simpler, with the case of linear demand. And if you think back at the basic formula, margin times price elasticity should be -1. That means we can, here in the case of linear demand, already compute the profit optimal price depending on the demand function here, which is characterized by the by the intercept, the slope, so the intercept A here, the slope, and the costs. So we know that the optimal price is half the costs plus minus this term. In fact, this term will be positive because B, the slope here, is almost always negative, or it's always negative in all relevant cases in pricing. So we're adding half of the cost to this term here. And that means, because we're thinking about here price changes, that when costs go up, let's say by 10 euros, we increase the price by half of the cost increase. So in linear demand, the profit optimal thing, if you're in the profit optimum before and you want to stay in the profit optimum, what you should do is pass on half of the absolute cost increase. It's different in exponential demand here, where the price elasticity is always the same, and you have the optimal price is cost times this term here that only depends on the price elasticity, and because that's constant, this will not change. And that means you always need to pass on the percentage change in your costs. So if costs go up 10%, you should increase the price by 10% because your margins need to stay the same because the price elasticity is always the same. So that means in the example that we had before, where we have costs of 100 and let's say these costs go up by 10% to 110, and your current price at the old cost was 200, you should, in the case of linear demand, increase your price by 5 euros, not to 200, but 205. I need to correct this. And in I should do that right away. What did we lose the screen?
Yes, we cannot see your screen anymore.
Okay, I pressed it twice, I think. You see it now again?
Still loading.
Yeah.
Now we're back on track.
Okay, perfect. And miracle, now it shows the right new price. So we increase here by half of the absolute increase. So we increase by 5 euros to 205. In this case, we increase by 20 euros to 220. So a cost change of 10 euros can lead, depending on the type of demand function, to a 5% increase or a 5 euro increase or 20 euro increase. And that's already a very significant range, right? So, and I think that the message here is, first, this is how you change your price at cost change, but you don't only need to know the price elasticity, but you also need to know the type of demand function, which typically is known, you can figure out in an industry if it's more like this or more like it's more exponential or more linear. That's also something in DAX case that's already included in the simulation in the tool that he's showing. But it's important to consider these things. So it's not just sufficient to know the price elasticity, you also need to know the type of demand function you're in to respond correctly to a cost increase. All right. And we come to the second survey question.
Yes, new poll on the question, which strategy do you rely on most when adjusting your prices? Let me go back there, rising. There's the poll. Now you should be able to see the polls on your screen popping up with the answer options for everybody joining on mobile. Passing cost increases to consumers, optimizing promotions, adjusting pack sizes, or balancing portfolio profitability, with another option of other and not answering. 40% participated already. Now we're to 50%. Everybody's really active today. Do not need to nudge the answers. Giving you 10 more seconds and then we share the results with you, and I'm presenting you that. Currently we seem to have 2 clear winners here. I'm ending the poll right now. and sharing the results with you, Ingo. We see passing cost increases to consumers and balancing the portfolio profitability.
Yeah, so I would say that's also what we expect, what many are doing with their pricing, right? So optimizing promotions, adjusting pack sizes. I think those are things that we see at least being discussed more than last year or 2 years ago. So I think we're really moving into this direction here. And looking at the time, let's move forward. Do I just click this?
No, I stopped sharing, and now you can continue.
Like this?
Yes.
Right, let's skip this. So as we said, we want to increase complexity subsequently. We went from a world where just cost change, nothing else changes. But of course, in the real world, more things are going on, right? So if we live in a world in inflation, not only our products are increasing in price, but also other products. There are, we see negotiations with unions and so on, that wages increase, or because of increasing prices, labor costs also increase, and that means people have nominally more money in some cases. So all of these things have influence on willingness to pay or ability to pay by consumers. Competitors are also typically affected in a very similar way to us by these cost increases, so they also will likely have to change their prices. And all of this, of course, has a direct impact on the price cost demand relationship that's relevant for us. So when in the previous chart we just assumed that everything stayed the same except our cost and what that means for our profit optimal price. In reality, we have all kinds of changes, right? And just in a simplified way here, costs mean that this point here moves to the right. And that's what we saw before. This profit, if you don't change your price, decreases, but there's another optimum that we just showed how to compute. And of course, in reality, what also happens if demand increases, that means this demand curve essentially goes up or shifts to the upper right corner. There's more demand at the same nominal price. And also if competitors also have to increase prices, really depends a bit on the total category elasticity. But what that typically means is that it lowers the price elasticity, and the demand curve sort of tilts a bit, leading to a lower price increase at every price point, and then allowing again for higher price changes if also competitors have to increase their prices. So in reality, many more things are going on, and in reality, and we have summarized this here, and because we have this also in a cheat sheet, I won't go into too much detail through everything here, but roughly what we showed was the simple one product case, and it's really difficult to show more than the one product case analytically. Even 2 or 3 products are getting really complex. That's why we have this tool that Doug will show in a minute. But just roughly, if you don't have access to a tool like this, it makes sense to work with some simple heuristics, and we put them together here. So typically in a portfolio, you can have higher prices than in a single product case, because the sales that you lose, some of them will stay within your portfolio. And after a cost increase, that premium for the portfolio prices versus the single product should roughly stay the same, typically in a range of 5 to 10%. As we already said, if we go down to competition, it's very important to consider also what competitors do, how they will be affected by cost changes, and how they will react if they increase prices. That allows you to also increase prices further. Corporate strategy, of course, most companies don't solely aim for a profit maximization, but some trade-off between revenue and profit, and that can be affected by cost changes, maybe shifting. So these are things that need to be considered. And what we've seen, or what we often hear if we look at this value pricing box, we see from pricing experts, see this quite a lot on LinkedIn, where they say things like costs don't matter in pricing. We just saw that should be taken with a grain of salt, because of course cost changes affect your profit, and therefore they do play a role in pricing and should play a role in pricing. So I think this is always important to consider. And the last point here, cost reduction. So if costs increase, you increase price. If they go down, just from the math, it indicates that cost or the prices should also be reduced. I think here it's really important because in some industries it's very unusual to decrease prices. In some it's very normal. Costs go up, you increase price, costs go down, you decrease prices. But in those industries where it's unusual, it makes more sense to look at alternatives. And typical alternatives are, if you don't want to decrease costs, is work with more promotions than previously. If you go into a shop, you see that in many stores, at least I do. And other alternatives would be to change the price pack architecture, maybe work with pack sizes to mitigate the effects of previous cost increases if you don't want to decrease these costs. So I think this, as a rough heuristic, if you're serious about pricing, of course, there are other alternatives, and Doug will mention one of them now.
Thanks, Ingo, and good morning or good afternoon, everyone. I'll take us through a quick example that we have in the platform. As an example, we have a cost of raw material that's increased by 10%, and we are tasked with designing a strategy to try and mitigate some of the loss in profitability. So in the platform, which I'll share in just a second, we'll see profitability drops, or profit drops by about 29% due to the fixed retailer margin that we have. And we've got a couple of different strategies, right? We can have a blanket price change. So you could just change all of your retail selling prices by 10%. You can increase that, pass it through to the consumer that we were speaking, or you were giving the answer about earlier, as the kind of most targeted strategy at the moment. Then you can start to kind of optimize some of those price changes. So kind of a next level down would be, okay, I'm not going to pass through 10% on this product, but I'm going to pass through 15 on one, 5 on the other. And we'll have a look at how that impacts the bottom line. And then, of course, you've got kind of further options for analysis. So PPA, pack size changes, so changing the weight of your product, most likely taking grams or ounces out, making it smaller, and hopefully selling the same amount or indeed more of that product. And of course, changing the promotional structure. So we'll have a look at what that would actually look like in practice in the platform. And just to say that the Buynomics platform works on the virtual shopper technology that we have at Buynomics. It's technology that we specifically developed to represent real shopper behavior, allowing you to simulate any of the RGM changes at a detailed product weekly level. So I'll go ahead and just show and share this example with you now. Okay, hopefully you can see that. Excellent. So what we have is the Buynomics platform, and I'm going to take us straight through into the analytics tab and just show us the example where we have a cost increase. So we have a simple product portfolio where we've got our own products, very innovatively named, own brand 1, 2, and 3, and we've got a set of competitor products as well. What we're looking at is the average price of our products, and we've got two different scenarios. We've got one of the market price, so that's pre-cost increase, and then we've got the amount of units that we're selling after the cost increase. Now, in this example, we've not passed through any of the costs, so the amount of units you're selling does not change. The revenue that you're getting in through the front door, through the retailers, does not change. However, the revenue for the manufacturer doesn't change, yet your profit does change. So you can see here, this is the 29% reduction in profit that we see through that increase in cost. So the question now is, okay, what is the strategy? How are we going to mitigate that reduction in profitability from circa 1.5 million to 1.13? And there's a few different options, and I'll kind of walk you through those now. So what I'd like to do is I'm just going to take you to a second scenario where we're comparing the increase in cost to a blanket 10% price increase. So now you can see this was my this is my new average price across my products, and they've gone up 10%. All the way down the product level you can see, and even in Buynomics you can change the different promotional types. You can see an associated loss in units for that given 10% price increase. You can see the change in revenue. You can see the change in revenue for your competitors as all of those products are interacting together. You can see the change in the manufacturer's revenue, so your revenue as a manufacturer, and then you can see the change in profit. Now, due to the fixed trade terms and the retailer margin being held constant, this is obviously a very profitable change for you. However, there is a trade-off, and the trade-off here is a reduction in the revenue that you are taking, so negative 10%, but an increase in profit by 20%. And the question really is, how does this scenario of a blanket price change fit within the context of all of the different options and different price changes that you can make, right? So is it better for me to increase one of my products, let's say own brand 3 by 20% and not take price on own brand 1? Now, some of that will be driven by the margin on your particular product, but some of it is driven by how shoppers are directly perceiving and interacting with those products and price changes. So what I want to do is just take you to our decision guide, which plots for us all of the different options that we could potentially make for a given scenario. So what I've got here is I've got every single dot is one of 960 different simulations of different price changes. And if you remember, the blanket price change was roughly a negative or roughly a 20% profit increase and roughly a negative 10% manufacturing revenue decrease. So we were previously in a scenario that was somewhere around here. 20% increase in profit and 11% reduction in manufacturer's revenue. And you can see that we are far from an optimal scenario here, and yet we didn't know what our pricing potential was. We started roughly where my arrow or my cursor is here. That's our starting point scenario, and we've actually moved here. So yes, very profitable, but actually we've lost in terms of our revenue. And there are many different scenarios that we could potentially choose in terms of making the situation better, both in terms of profit and in terms of revenue. For example, this one here on the kind of Pareto front that we've got represents a different set of price changes that can be made. And in this case, we can see there's a 24% increase in profit for the manufacturer and a 1% increase in revenue. Overall, completely better than what we were previously looking at, which was a decrease in revenue, but a lower increase in profit. So let's have a look at what that might look like when we put it back into our table. So we've got our 10% increase in price, and then we've got our blanket 10% price increase. What I'm going to do is just add in that scenario that we found earlier, which was an even better scenario for our price increase, and analyze that to see how it changes. Now, if I scroll to the right, or I stay here, we can just have a look at how the decision guide has optimized my price changes. And in this case, because of the interaction across products, it's completely different to what we might have thought about doing in the first instance. Now, remember, this is a demo environment, so obviously some of this might not reflect real life. But here, given the interaction of our products, we're suggesting actually to decrease prices on 2 of our brands and increase price significantly on 1 of our brands. And the effect that has is we lose fewer units. This was our previous blanket 10%. We would lose 16% across all our brands. Now we're only losing 8% in terms of units. Revenue in terms of retail sales value is flat. We're no longer using retail sales value. Our revenue as a manufacturer, as we know, goes up by 1%, not down by 10%. And we increase the profit by 23%, not 20%. So overall, we are completely, as we would say in the UK, blowing that out the water in terms of a better scenario that we wouldn't have even known about because we probably wouldn't have considered or approached a scenario where we decreased the prices for some of our products. How does that look in terms of a chart? Well, it's very easy for us to plot that in Buynomics. You can see this is our optimal scenario. You can see how the brands and the profitability changes across those different scenarios. This was our original cost increase. This is where we ended up with our blanket price increase. And this is where we end up with that scenario, that optimal solution from our decision guide. We could do other things in Buynomics that I won't show today, but we'd be more than happy to set up a demo around changing the kind of pack size or the promotions. So for example, here, now what we've got is the PPA change in terms of the profit of the manufacturer. We have a PPA change scenario which delivers even higher profit. So that was reducing the size of some of our products, reducing the cost of those proportionally, and then we can see the increase in profit by a result of doing that. All of this, of course, is done at a weekly product level. So you're always able to see, okay, for a given week, what is the change in this example of units between my blanket 10% price increase and my optimal solution? And you can see for the units in this example that we're looking at across this year, the blue line, our optimal solution, and almost every single week is delivering higher sales, most likely as a result of some of the decrease in prices, but also we know that it's delivering much higher profit compared to that blanket price increase. That is kind of a whistle-stop tour of a couple of different options of the scenarios. Ingo, I'll hand back to you. I've seen some lots of different notifications. I think there'll be a few questions coming in that we'll answer at the end, unless there are any that I need to address now.
Perfect. Jonathan will sort that all out and then get the questions to you. Thank you so much. I think it gave an intro of like the basic functioning. And I think what you also see is that like from the very simple example with one product and the whole economy being a monolith, not split in weeks and everything, it escalates quickly, right? In terms of complexity, what's all going on. And there, of course, things we didn't mention, there's also interactions, can be interactions between weeks. So people buy a promotion one week, they don't buy it the next week, the same product anymore or less of it. So there are all kinds of things going on in reality. And I think the way to address it, as I said, is either with very simple heuristics or really with a tool. And now is really the time there that the technology is strong enough, both from like the software side with machine learning AI, and also from the hardware side and the data availability to make it work in the end. So as Doug said, if you're interested in like more details, we're really happy to set up a demo. Just reach out and we're happy to set something up. With that, let's go back to the presentation and wrap up. Can you see the presentation again?
Yes.
All right. So just to summarize, so we did a quick but very broad tour around different topics on price, on cost volatility, and what that means for pricing and revenue growth management. I think to summarize, from our point of view, I think we came from a world with sort of lower commodity prices, more stability in commodity prices, at least compared to the situation now, to an increase in prices, and now also an increase in volatility. And typically volatility, same with stock prices, volatility tends to stay for longer. It's one of my favorite words in statistics, heteroscedasticity, which describes the phenomenon of that volatility is autocorrelated, right? If it's high, it tends to stay high for a while. If it's low, it tends to stay low for a while. So that's, I think, the world we'll live in for at least the midterm. We've seen that for the simplest case, the simple product case, and typically everything where we use price elasticity and other things that's sort of implied, right? If you work with elasticity, you assume typically that there are no interactions between products and so on. So in this case, it's very simple to if you know your cost change, if you know the demand, it's very simple to compute the reaction to a cost change, as we've seen. In real world cases, with the complexity that Doug sort of introduced, also I would say in a bit simplified case, so real cases that most of you are dealing with are even a bit more complex than that, which we can also handle. But for these cases, I think there are two ways of dealing with that. One is with like guidelines and heuristics. We put together some, and we also put them in the cheat sheet that I think Jonathan put for download. or you really go for the complexity and really simulate the interactions, which is what Doug highlighted. And I think, and that's also something that that Doug touched on, is that in particular in cases with high volatility, it makes sense to really use the full toolkit that we have in RGM and not just work with price changes, but also with the other levers, PPA changes, promotions, and so on, to really make the best use of the situation, and really find the optimal that aligns with the strategy, which is also something that Doug touched on. Most companies don't just go for the profit optimum or the revenue optimum, but typically some trade-off between the two. Profitable growth, it's typically called, and that's really something that can be supported with proper technology. So this much to summarize, and I think with this we go to the Q&A part, and I hand over to Jonathan.
Yes, and we got a lot of questions. Thank you so much. We saw a lot of them in the chat, but also in the Q&A section, and I will make sure to answer all of them and pick some of those now, which have the same topic basically, to ask you guys directly. The first question is more on PPA, price pack architecture. Two questions. The first from Dimitri: what are the best practices for adjusting pack sizes to mitigate margin erosion while aligning with changing shopper preferences or behavior?
Doug, you want to go?
Yeah, I think speaking from experience across the last 10 years working with companies that do this sort of thing, what we've really seen in the last couple of years, it's come to a fore in terms of the ability to make these changes in the market because of the rising costs and the retailer's appetite. I think what we see is the opposite to what everyone usually says, which is not little and often, right? Consumers don't tolerate little and often in terms of the PPA adjustments, right? Usually when we're talking about PPA adjustments, most people are changing the size in terms of making products smaller. What we've seen is that what works best is one-off adjustments, and that's obviously better for your supply chain. So small adjustments driving costs through the supply chain, asking the manufacturing teams to change the pack size every 6 weeks is never going to be a happy conversation for you or for them. So, once-off changes that resonate well, and obviously in terms of something that works in terms of the broader mix of your portfolio. So, you've probably got a fairly comprehensive slope that works in terms of the pricing. You want to make sure that you're keeping that consistent, so you're not disrupting the value proposition of your different products in your portfolio. So whether that be, your value packs, they must stay value. Those are the sorts of things that we have worked with companies on, and we see work well in the given market context.
Thank you so much. I think an extensive answer. And Natalia is also asking something about PPA, and especially what we just showed in the demo. When you do a smart pricing scenario, as opposed to blanket, you would affect your price pack architecture. The PPA limitations should be listed somewhere in the model, but for how long is any PPA structure relevant to the consumers, and what would be the triggers for its change?
Yeah, I think there's that great question. I could probably spend 20 minutes answering. I'll try and do 20 seconds or fewer. With regards to changing the prices, right? So we can do, when we talk about price pack architecture, we're really talking about changing the size. Now, when we change the size, we don't need to change the price, right? The price per kilo or price per liter or price per ounce might change, but the absolute price on the shelf doesn't have to change. And that's a key thing to consider, is the value that consumers are getting with regards to the price on the shelf versus the price per measuring unit, weight, grams, ounces, etc. And within the Buynomics model, we have the ability, and we have the trained shoppers who know and understand the different value of different sizes. So you can change one independently of the other, or change both and see the impact. I think, yeah, I'd love to spend more on that, but want to give time for other questions.
Thanks, Doug. Yeah, great question indeed, super in-depth. Two other questions would be, how much data is needed to calculate that broad number of solutions or scenarios? And another question following up on this from Ezekiel is, how feasible is it to calculate an accurate enough elasticity by product or brand to make such complex scenarios?
think there's probably
you want to go?
Yeah, that's probably for me as well. I think we need to get the audience to ask some more theoretical questions, so Ingo can answer. But on the data, so for example, I think that probably came in when we were looking at the decision guide, so the 960 different solutions. For that, what we usually train our model on is 3 years of historic sales data. So that's at a product weekly level. That's kind of the best level of data that we get to give you the understanding and the accuracy to simulate those 960. Takes less than an hour, probably 30 minutes to run those sorts of simulations. And with regards to the question on elasticity, one of the key things about the Buynomics method is it's not predicated on an a priori elasticity, right? So we don't calculate elasticities and then run a model. What we have is this virtual shopper technology, which has a set of preferences. Consumers and shoppers make buying decisions, after which we calculate an elasticity. And that's because elasticity changes in every given buying situation, whether your competitors change price, whether the portfolio changes, whether it's summer, whether it's winter, your product price elasticity is going to be different.
Yeah, and the model, just to add, works fundamentally in predicting the unit sales. So these are the prices, these are the products that have been offered in one situation, and it computes the sales, and it does that at another situation, maybe with different prices, and then for this change, it computes the price elasticity for that specific situation. As Doug said, competitor price changes, removing a product, all kinds of things can affect a product's price elasticity. So they're always fresh and specific to a situation. Should we move? Maybe we can answer.
Yes, I think so too. We have a lot more questions, but we make sure, I sit together with Doug and Ingo, we make sure to answer them by email. And as always, you can also book a direct meeting with us. But now let's go to the next sessions we have planned. Skipping the RGM maturity framework. Yeah. The next question is a novel session for Buynomics. It's more of a panel discussion that we will be hosting on February 12th, together with Nuno Alexandre from Unilever and with Harry Ergen from Ajinomoto Foods. February 12th, 5 p.m. CET, 11 a.m. EST, and 8 a.m. Pacific time, where Harry is situated. I hope I got this right. Let me just share with you the landing page where you can freely register for this session. We make sure to also include this in the follow-up of this webinar, together with the recording and the answer of all the questions. And I'm really sure this will be an exciting discussion. Last year, we already had Nuno from Unilever, which was a great session with a lot of audience engagement, a lot of questions to experts from the industry, actually. And after the session in February, we will have another session on the revenue manager of tomorrow with Ivan Tretyakov from our ex-Danone and our own Ingo Reinhardt. The registration is not open yet, so please make sure to check your emails in the next days where you can register for both. And with that, I would like to thank you, Ingo and Doug, for this great presentation. I would like to thank the audience for those great questions that we got in the chat. I think it was a lively discussion, and hope to catch you all in our next sessions, and have a lovely rest of the week.
Same here. Thanks, Jonathan. Thanks, Doug. Thanks, everyone, for joining. Looking forward to the next one. And yeah, have a good rest of Wednesday. It was the first time for us on a Wednesday. I hope it worked.
Great. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.